Book of Proverbs is a fascinating group of books. In it, you get to understand and be exposed to the divine wisdom that comes directly from God. Sometimes we look at these scriptures and we think, wow, this is so much information for me to retain. However, today, I want to take a different approach to understanding God's wisdom by just simply looking at it in a very practical way, because wisdom isn't always as mystical as we might think it is, but it's very practical, very commonsensical. And so today we'll be looking in the Book of Proverbs, chapter 27. You're listening to His Generation Podcast, a weekly exploration into biblical truth as we explore the Word of God. His Generation Podcast airs every Sunday morning, so grab your Bible, and here we go. And today we're looking at the Book of Proverbs. And specifically, we're going to look at chapter 27. And I'm going to take a couple passages out of there and help us to be able to build our mindset when it comes to understanding the wisdom of God. And it's not as mystical as sometimes we make it sound. It's very practical. And we have to understand that even on the practical level, this is God's wisdom. Thus, if it's God's wisdom, then it's priceless. There's no value you can put on it. Just like the Proverbs say, wisdom is more valuable than rubies and precious gold and all this other stuff. Because that's the reality of it. They're not just being poetic about it. This wisdom from God is much more than you could buy. But I'm going to show you how practically it's easy to obtain it through looking at the Book of Proverbs. Well, understanding the Book of Proverbs, this is my first piece of information I want to give to you, the audience. You must look at the Book of Proverbs as something that is written for maybe someone of a younger age. Someone who's beginning, a learner, but not only a learner in beginning stages, but a learner in beginning life. And so it's really like a primer for young people or maybe like adolescent age people. And so you have to look at it that, especially chapters 1 through 9. There's a lot of primer. There's a lot of, if anyone who knows how to paint, you understand sometimes you got to put a primer down before you put the real coat. And so in the Book of Proverbs, chapters 1 through 9, it's like that primer. And it's addressed to a young man, although, you don't have to specifically be a man to understand the wisdom in there. You can be both male and female to understand the wisdom that's being there. But for story's sake and for cultural sake, it's addressed to a young man. And it's addressed to a young man from the words of a father and also the words of his mother. And the words of the father start out very clearly in chapter 1. I'm going to read that portion, chapter 2 to chapter 7. Because if we have this portion, we understand how to start to begin to interpret all the other little passages that we see within the Book of Proverbs. It says there in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So, like I said, addressed to a young man who doesn't want to be a young man anymore. You'll have in there 3 different categories. You have a young man, the simple, and the fool. The fool is not teachable, but the simple and the young man, they are teachable. And thus, if they want to gain in their knowledge, to gain in their understanding, first and foremost, they must fear God. And second, they must listen to the wise counsel that's about to be given to them in the Book of Proverbs. And so let's turn to chapter 27, and we're looking at the passage of verses 23 through 27. Now, I would argue that this is a group of passages that's meant to be read in one sitting. And so rather than taking, maybe one verse and dissecting it, which is a good majority of the Proverbs after Proverbs chapter 10, This, I would say, is one of those groups of passages that you need to read together to gain its wisdom. And so looking at Proverbs chapter 27, verses 23, I'm going to read through it, and let's listen to what this divine wisdom is all about and how practical it really is. It says there, "Be diligent to know the state of your flocks, and attend to your herds. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. When the hay is removed and the tender grass shows itself, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, the lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. You shall have enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and the nourishment of your maidservants." First and foremost, this is poetic. And so when you start to look at poetic, there's a lot of figurative language in there. It's a lot of composition that is with creativity and kind of the imagine. But this imagination isn't something that they're not used to, the hearer that is, because they lived in a very agrarian society where they were, they used cattle and they used goats and sheep and the animals, and that was part of their income, and it was also part of how they would provide for their household. And so they understood these different observations of life here in the reality of sheep herding, or in the reality of just living off of the land and providing for your family with that. And so there was some very common sense observations there for them to gain understanding, and in this case, more specifically, because of the intent of this passage, to gain wisdom. Wisdom. Now, when we look at wisdom, first and foremost, think of divine wisdom, not just day-to-day, hey, that's a good idea. This is something that comes directly from God. And so if it comes directly from God, it's not something that is to be rejected. It's not something that is to be argued. It's something to be meditated upon and put into practice. And you might fail in your practice at some point, but nevertheless, as a learner, as this young man was, or maybe the simple-minded in this case, this is something to apply and to learn. And so we have to look at it that way. So let's look at some of the qualities of this poeticness. First and foremost, you have there, it says, the very beginning, verse 23, "Be diligent to know the state of your flocks." That word diligent really isn't in the text, but the idea behind diligence is what is being led there, because the main emphasis of the word there is know, to know, like to know well is what it's trying to say. Like, make sure that you understand completely the state of your flocks. Take well account on the situation is basically what it's saying. Because, again, it's an agrarian culture, and so they must be aware of their animals. They must take very good care of them, and the breeding of them, the feeding of them, the caring of them, the protecting of them, the leading of them, all those things are going to consume one's time. Thus, the word diligent was probably added to that. And so know well the state of your flocks. Well, why? Well, in this case, it's saying, for riches are not forever, nor does the crown endure to all generations. So a quick little saying there is basically saying, not everyone's going to be rich, and what you do have isn't going to last forever. Like, there's a time and a moment and a season, and your flocks are provided for you to fulfill the needs that you have within that time, that moment, that season. That's the idea that's there. And so the wisdom now begins. The wisdom, understanding, training now begins. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not just herding these flocks just for herd's sake, and nor should I be doing more than what I have before me, nor should I be thinking about a dreamy future that may or may not come, right? I should be here in the moment, giving my complete focus and knowledge and understanding to this situation, because this is what's been provided for me. That's the idea. There's the wisdom. This has been provided for me. I must pay attention to this. And that's why it goes on to say in verse 25, in other words, to this idea of like, this is the season. When the hay is removed and the tender grass shows itself and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, the lambs will provide your clothing. So as the seasons change, because when they start to say the grass appears or doesn't appear, things like they're talking about the feeding of these lambs because they need nutrients to grow, and that's part of the process of herding them. Is you take them to one pasture, to another field, to another area, and this and that. And so these sheep are growing, right? And they are providing not only, in this case, clothing because of the wool, right, from the sheep, but also to food and also to a next generation of more animals to continue to bring about to help your family and to buy and sell and do all those other kind of things in the market. And so it's all the economy of an agrarian culture, the idea behind it. But first and foremost, that provision is for the home. It's for what God has given you. That's the understanding here. For what God has given you. So the lambs provide the clothing, and the goats the price of the field, and you shall have enough goat's milk for your food and for the food of your household. So there it is. As I diligently attend to my sheep, have a strong understanding in taking care of them, being mindful of those things, not getting distracted with high hopes, being in the moment, providing for and taking care of what God has given me, I will reap the reward of that, which is provision for my household. And then here is the icing on the cake. So what I just said right now is just all wisdom. It might just sound plain simple, like, oh, no kidding. But here's the idea of the very simple to understand. This is divine wisdom that's being explained to you. Because at the very end, you start to understand this is a sovereign act of God. Because here is where we see the hand of God. It says, for the food of your household and the nourishment of your maidservants. So it's not only talking about your own personal household, but also, too, those that maybe are employed by you in this case, the maidservants. So these would be the ones that would be part of this ranch or household, whatever it is, farm. But they're there as employees. They're there to help with whatever is going on in this, agrarian style of economy. They're your technical employees. But it's there to provide for them also. So it's not only to provide for your household, but provide for others. And that's where we see the hand of God. That's where we see the hand of God. We see it in other scriptures too. I think it's in Ephesians where Paul talks about those who stole before no longer steal. But what did they do besides just no longer stealing? But they work hard to not only provide for themselves, but to provide for those who are in need, the poor, or anyone else that comes within their sphere of influence that needs provision. Your hard work is to be an extension into their lives. That is the hand of God. That's the economy of God. That is what it truly means to not steal, as in one of the commandments. It's not that you just don't steal. You don't fulfill the commandment if you just don't steal, but you don't steal, and what you do have, you give to others. Now you fulfill the commandment of love. And this is the wisdom. It's very simple. It's very attainable. It seems oh, no kidding. Of course. Of course I work hard and be diligent, this and that. Sure. But it's God's design for you to do that, because not only has God provided for you those different means to work hard for, but also He has provided for you to provide for others. Thus, that is the act of God. Do you see that, people? And that's what's beauty about the wisdom. It's not something mystical. It's not something out of reach. It's just something that people don't open their eyes to see sometimes. And to add that, what is the character of God in this very practical thing that I'm doing, whether it's working hard or loving my family or just being a good neighbor. But there is always a very God-righteous thing that's going on in there. And we need to look for it. And then, and only then, you will understand the wisdom of God that He's given us. And He's given it to us freely according to the scriptures. So I hope this Sunday morning, you can think about these things. You can apply them. It's very simple and it's very God-given. And He gives that to us very freely. So thank be to God on this, His Lord's Day. Thank you. And thank you for listening to another episode of His Generation podcast. For more information, visit our website at hisgeneration.net. His Generation Podcast is a production of Generation Mars Media, located in beautiful Orange County, California.